You're listening to Customer Growth Sessions, presented by Intergrowth, where we talk through strategies to help up-and-coming e-commerce businesses bring in more customers. I'm your host, Pat Ahern. Let's jump in. Okay, listeners, welcome back. Today, I'm thrilled to bring on Bastian Kröhnert-Ferron. I'm sure he'll tell me that I butchered the pronunciation, but Bastian Kröhnert-Ferron, the founder of Mammutmarsch. So Bastian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Pat. Good to be here.
Good to have you. Good to have you. First of all, tell the audience, what is a Mammutmarsch?
Mammutmarsch is something we really started in 2013. It's extreme hiking events. We started with 100 kilometers in 24 hours. It's like an ultra marathon, but in hiking. We have like a big starting celebration, a big kickoff event. Then there's supply posts. There's a big ceremony at the finish with medals, certificates, celebration, flags, drums, everything. And yeah, that's basically a Mammutmarsch. Today, I sometimes use the term marathon for the masses because it's a bit same type of motivation why someone would do that, to answer a question that always comes when I say, oh, it's 100 kilometers in 24 hours. So it's the same kind of motivation why people would do a marathon. And to be fair, the shortest distance we have today is 30 kilometers. So we do have shorter distances as well. We don't just have the extreme 100 kilometers, but that's in a nutshell what Mammutmarsch is. Extreme hiking, like marathons, between 30 and up to 180 kilometers if we count in the events where people can do as much as they want.
That's wild. What gave you the idea to start the business? I know you mentioned back in 2013 the website first launched, but talk me through kind of the founding story.
Yeah, basically, after I finished school, I hiked 100 kilometers with a friend. And same kind of stupid story. We thought, hey, can we hike 100 kilometers in 24 hours? And we just headed out and tried to do it. And this is how it started in 2007, right after I finished high school, before I entered university. We did 100 kilometers in 24 hours. And it was super painful. We suffered immensely. Afterwards, we thought we would never do anything like that again. But hey, a few years later, with a few beers at a bar in Berlin, we talked about it. Originally, we just wanted to do it again. And then that same evening, I was sitting there in my apartment and I was thinking, maybe let's just give it a name. Let's just maybe put up like a small landing page. And so we did that. We posted it into our private Facebooks, which was still something you used to do back then. And people started signing up. So it was a simple page. Just you could submit a form, and then some 48 people or so submitted the form. Eventually, we ended up having only 17 people because we just texted them a week before the event. Hey, by the way, you signed up for this Mammutmarsch event next weekend. Be there at 3 p.m. and bring the 25 euros or what it was back then. So yeah, that's basically how it started.
I was going to say, what a fun story when you have a business that starts out having beers with your buddy and then it actually ends up being a legitimate business. So talk to us a little about kind of that phase from what I thought was really fascinating is on your website, you really highlight the fact that 2015, you had your first event that was 1,000 plus. And that is a monumental gain for any business. How did you guys go from 2013 launching your first website, first event has 17 attendees, to 2 years later, you're up to 1,000 attendees for a single event?
I think the key for that is to really do something that people truly crave. Like in any type of project that you would start, I think it's the same for all industries. And I think that's what we managed to do. We developed something that really attracted people, that people are really fascinated by. And why is that? The main thing is, like, the first reaction generally when I talk about 100 kilometers of hiking, people say, what the fuck? Like, can I swear here?
It's all good.
They wonder, like, who would do that? Who would hike 100 kilometers? And the answer is simple. I think one thing that we're fundamentally missing in most Western societies especially is a real challenge, that we really test ourselves, that we really go to a point where we feel this is the limit, this is where I'm going to break. And so this is what we started to offer to people. We started offering them, you can come to our event and we're going to push you to your limit. And at first it sounds like something, leave me alone. Like, why would I want that? But the thing is, if you do that and if you truly experience that, it can be so profound, because we rarely ever do that unless we're like really into sports. We're like athletes. I'm not saying no one does that, but generally the general public, we're more like, the general verdict in society is more like, hey, make sure you don't get into the cold, you wear warm clothes, you don't overexert yourself. So it's all about comfort and safety. And what we're losing is that sensation of, oh, wow, did I actually just do that? Did I actually just go to that point and overcome it? We don't overcome, especially not voluntarily. We're all confronted with challenges anyway, and then we may struggle because we're not used to it. We don't practice it, but we've lost that a little bit, this having to overcome. And that's what you do if you do a Mammutmarsch. You get to a point, and to varying degrees, if it's a 30-kilometer event, it's a different kind of limit than if it's 100K, where everybody at the end is fighting. But at every event of ours, you have to push yourself a little bit. You have to really push yourself, and you have to overcome that voice that tells you, here it's getting painful, here it's getting hard. Here I'd just like to sit down, have a beer, watch soccer. It's Saturday evening, let's just watch soccer. That's number one. Number two is, when you do finish, when you cross the finish line, looking back at that struggle, at that fight, at that overcoming the threshold, and then you cross the finish line and there's a group of like 50 or 100 people and they're celebrating you, and you get your medal, you get your certificate, you get like a huge applause. You can't imagine how many people drop to their knees or start crying, because all of a sudden I've been fighting, I've overcome myself, I've overcome my limitations, and now there's strangers giving me recognition, giving me appreciation. Two things we rarely ever experience. It feels a bit like I'm not answering your question, but I am, because I think that's the reason why we took it from 17 to 1,000 people in just these 2 years. Because back then we didn't do much in terms of marketing. We didn't go out there and try, how can we reach more people? How can we get the message out there? And that's why I'm giving you that answer, because I think for any project, whether that's a charity, a social business, and a business, and entrepreneurial project, for every project, that's really the foundation, that you create something that gives people something they maybe haven't had before, that gives people something that makes them feel meaning, that makes them feel a sense of, you feel a bit special after doing something like that, and you tell it to your friends, and none of them has done that. Also it gives you a sense of accomplishment.
I would say like the ultimate grassroots community that you guys have really built up. To your point, forcing people outside their comfort zone, forcing them to do something that they wouldn't do in a normal day, and that they try to do everything possible to actively avoid doing on the typical day of the week. Hearing this, I would assume that quite a few of the people who actually attend the events really do the marketing for you. It sounds like they're probably coming back to future events, and then they're getting their friends to join for quite a few events as well. Is that correct?
That's correct, 100%. So, we have many people come back. We have those patches. So once you complete a certain number of kilometers, we have this little booklet, and you can collect stamps for each 10 kilometers you hike. And then they get patches. So like the first ones after 150 kilometers, then there's 200, and it's like a belt system in karate or in martial arts. And we even kind of got inspired by the colors, so like yellow, orange, green, blue, something like that. And yeah, we have many people come back. Although, once again, I think it's the same sensation we had when we did our first 100-kilometer all the way back in 2007. right after the event, there's this sensation of not going to do that again. That was hard. I'm not going to do that again. But then you sit at home, you think back and you feel this sense of accomplishment, this sense of, wow, man, like people tell us like that sometimes they just feel it for weeks or even months. It's like, yeah, great. And that's why I think they eventually, like many of them come back. And also, yeah, it's just something you talk about, right? When you do something like that, when you head out on an adventure, we just talk about it. That's why our community, the people who do one of our events, a lot of the time, they tell colleagues about it, they tell family members about it. And that's why, yeah, there's definitely that kind of dynamic. And that's also why it grew from like 13 to 1,000 in that initial stage, in that first period, because people talked about it, people came back.
And one of the really interesting points you had brought up is, like, I would call it gamification, but the idea of, you can get a stamp for every X number of kilometers that you end up going. One of the things I'd love to dive deeper into, what are some of the other things that you built into Mammutmarsch outside of that gamification element to make it so it's easier for people to share that experience with others?
Well, one thing that makes it super easy to share it with others, we have a referral system. So if you sign up to one of our events, you're automatically redirected to like our referral page. So it's going to tell you, do you want a free ticket? Do you want a free hoodie? Do you want a free gift? And you just get like a custom URL or a custom code. And so we have that kind of thing. Not sure if you're familiar with the story. There was a brand called Harry's, I think, who they sold shavers. And Tim Ferriss wrote about their case study, how they collected, 100,000 emails in a week or so. Are you familiar with that case?
Is that Dollar Shave Club, perchance? The one that had the commercial that was like, our razors are fucking awesome. And that was like their whole slogan. But either way, familiar with quite a few of those. I use Harry's personally. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think it's not Dollar Shave Club, but I might mess it up. It's been years since I heard about that case. But we basically modeled that. So they had a referral system with kind of a structure like that. And then we overhauled it, because one thing we always do when we do something, we ask our community. So we never assume that we know the answers. I never assumed that anyway. I never assumed that in relationship to my team. I never assumed that in relationship to anyone. I always assume the only result is a result. And what I love to do in my marketing, I like to ask people. And so we did a survey back then. We asked people, hey, what do you think? How many friends could you bring? And what would you like as a reward? And so we redesigned the whole referral system around that. So that's one thing we have, the referral system. And what else do we have? I think we really focus on community, and we really focus on giving people to work out that feeling, what it means to be part of our community. For some reason, we really succeed in doing that. And I'm saying for some reason, because of course, some of those things didn't start out as marketing strategy. It was just like us putting in a lot of passion and telling stories in a certain way that inspired people. And so they felt drawn to that cause, to that purpose, to that whole mission of outgrowing yourself, empowering others, which is the core of what we do. And all of this probably paired with what I said initially, this extreme experience of overcoming yourself, hitting a limit, personal challenge, and then really getting some recognition and a sense of accomplishment out of that. That in itself, it leads to people becoming addicted, and it leads to people having sensations they're not used to and coming back. And I think all of this leads to the kind of strong community we're having with, for example, at least a 3-digit number of people having like tattoos, for example, of our logos. Like some people, one guy has like a big mammoth on the back of his head, like down his neck, and People have like their whole forearms or like their calves with Mammutmarsch tattoos. Some have like more subtle ones, some are on their wrists. That kind of thing you don't see if there's no real feeling of belonging, of I want to show that I'm a part of that tribe, that I'm a part of that cause. And I think those are a few things that we do, that we see. And I think a last thing is that we really walk the talk, that we really live what we talk about. So one example is the pandemic, which of course for every business and every project that's doing something in tourism, something in events where people have to come together, where people have to move around, we're like vastly restricted in that period. And so from the beginning, we sat together and we were like, yeah, that's not going to stop us. That's definitely not going to stop us. And what are we going to do with this? And so at the very beginning, already in March 2020, we did something, for example, called Hike at Home. And some people were in their little student dormitory room of like 25 square meters. They were walking in circles and counting laps and doing 5,000 laps in their little rooms. Or one of our like most loyal participants, I think he was doing 170 kilometers in his apartment in Hanover, in Germany. And we did the whole thing to raise funds because we thought, okay, there's a pandemic. Let's do something against this. Like even if there's this big thing, that's what I mean when I say we truly live this. Something comes up. Okay, not going to stop us. What are we going to do about this? And that's how we managed the pandemic. And I think we really showed to our community, we're not telling stories. We're not telling fairy tales here. What we're talking about, we live this 100%. If something hard comes up, bring it on. We're going to conquer it. And then we did another thing called the Around the World Challenge, another virtual event where people, back then they could leave their houses again. So they would just, wherever they were, hike, upload their GPS track. And the goal was to collect the 40,070 kilometers, I think, once around the equator. And then we ended up going, like 2.5 times and doing 108,000 kilometers or so. So we did those kinds of things. By the way, this year we're going to do To the Moon, and we're going to do 384,000 kilometers in like an event in August. Now we don't have to do it virtually anymore, so we do a combination. But those kinds of things that we always also sit down and think about, what's something really cool that we could do to show people that we live this thing. And especially, I think, this difficult period of the pandemic was like really the biggest chance for us to grow into our philosophy, demonstrate it, really live it. And I think people just saw it. So I always say we didn't lose anything in the pandemic. Like we came out way stronger afterwards because we could demonstrate, hey, this is what we do. This is what we live. This is not some marketing talk. This is our philosophy. This is what we believe in.
I love the pandemic stories in particular. They're just very creative ideas that clearly was loved by the community. So within that, I want to go back a couple years, let's say pre-pandemic. So we're in like that 2015 to like 2019 time range. 2015, you've had your first event, 1,000 attendees. 2019, certainly significantly larger by then. One of the biggest things you shared that stood out to me, though, is that it sounds like there's been such a big focus from day one on building a community around the central idea of pushing yourself beyond your limits. My assumption is, at least in the early stages, most people maybe were attending an event 1 year and then 12 months later, they were attending another event. I'd love to dive into the day-to-day. What were some of the things that you guys found yourselves doing to really foster that community in between events? Certainly 2019, 2020, there are some really big examples that you shared. What are some of the smaller things you would do in terms of like that community engagement side of things?
So the period between 2015 and 2019 indeed was a bit of another breaking point for us, because in 2016, we had one of our biggest failures, at least back then so far. 2016 we grew from the 1,000 participants in 2015 to 2,500 in 2016. And the thing was, 2016, a few things came together. In brief, we had to cancel the event in the middle of the night. We'd been working on this for like months, and it was mostly at that point me and Kalle, my co-founder, and we were both at this point, we were completely burned out. And then the event was a failure. The story was that actually people started passing out. Sounds so scary. Actually, it was a super cold night, and people during the day, it was 26 degrees. So people came in shorts and t-shirts. And back then we didn't have mandatory minimum equipment, rain jacket, warm clothes, which we do now. So now we really prepare people to make sure they know what to expect and they're ready to face it. And so back then, quite some people, and because it was such a big step from 1,000 to 2,500, actually, we weren't prepared. There might be additional preparation needed. There might be additional communication needed once reaching a few more people who may not be prepared for those kinds of challenges. So in short, we had to cancel that event in the middle of the night. It was a scary thing to do because back then it's Germany and it was in a pretty rural region around Berlin and Brandenburg. And so they have one ambulance. If they call the one in from the next region, they may have two because generally they don't need more in that region. And so they were getting scared. So I was having headquarters on the phone at some point, and they're like, what's going on there? Now we received a bunch of 911 calls and 112 calls that is in Germany. And so what's going on there? Is there a problem? And so at some point we made the decision okay, we're not sure if this is not getting out of hand here right now. So we made the decision, let's stop it. We had buses in place so we could easily shuttle people to the next closest train stations. And so we made the decision, okay, let's call it a day here. Maybe this is getting out of hand. Let's make sure now we can still control this. Let's cancel it. But because it's Germany, headquarters had triggered something that's an emergency alert, what they might do when there's a terrorist attack, when they really mobilize additional voluntary Red Cross emergency services. And so those started pulling up. There were trucks showing up at the events, setting up mobile little field hospitals and that kind of thing. And we were there what did we do? Where did we mess this one up? I remember this one road where we had one of our supply posts. I could see probably 20 ambulances lined up on that road with the blue light and everything. And imagine, that was traumatizing. So we did have that setback in 2016. And now I have no problem talking about it whatsoever. But back then, that was a breaking point where I really considered, do I want to continue this or did we just miscalculate? And then, of course, as we always do when something goes wrong, we learn our lessons. We sat down and we really analyzed what went wrong. How do we fix this? And we made sure everything that had the potential to a similar scenario to prevent it, to have a bulletproof wizard hurricane safety concept in place, to communicate way better in advance with the official emergency services. And so, there was a bit of a tipping point, but that doesn't really answer your question because you were more your question was more targeted towards what do we do that made it work and that didn't almost break it. But then again, once again, it's probably us being properly challenged and overcoming the challenge. And I admit with difficulty because it was hard to get back to our feet after, I'm not sure if I ever felt so burned out. Before that event, I remember often at night after doing all the work that could be done in the day, coming to my ex-girlfriend's place and then basically just collapsing with my head on her lap. She was on the couch and I was just collapsing So I was so burned out back then that then when it also failed, the event, generally things always worked out before, even if something got hard. But what a great test it is also to have something really fail, then recover from it. And yeah, we did learn our lessons, which probably was the key step required for the next growth and for the growth we're experiencing today, that we did fix those things in the initial stages. And so
love it.
Then from 2016, 17, 18, 19, one thing we did, we started having the first events outside of Berlin. So we had Munich, the first 100K. We had one in the west of Germany. And that was definitely one step, expanding to new locations. And then also hiring our first team members. Then we started hiring the first event manager, hiring the first person in marketing. We always had the split. That's why we're talking. I always did the marketing part, and my co-founder, we didn't always have that split, but at some point we decided, okay, let's really do what we both do best. And you take care of the event management. I take care of the marketing. And that's how it stayed until this day, that now I'm in charge of of course, like bigger marketing team than back then. And he's in charge of the event management team. Those were like critical steps that happened in that time frame that we almost broke. We expanded afterwards, after we proved ourselves. Of course, first we had a smaller one to just prove, okay, we can do this. Then we expanded. Then we started building the team. And I think those are like the key happenings. And also one key shift that happened at that stage. When I told you about how it all started, you could get the idea that it was never intended to be a big project. 70 people, just, let's set up a landing page. Let's see if anyone wants to join us. So it wasn't intended to grow into anything in particular. Back then, I would say maybe 2017, we really decided, okay, let's take this seriously. Let's really focus on this. Let's make this our main project. And that definitely was a main tipping point as well.
I love that. And it sounds in so many ways what you hear is like the traditional entrepreneurial journey, whereas it started out just this passion project, like, hey, we're really excited for this. We want to push our limits. It sounds like 2016 was that experience where you kind of said like, hey, maybe we need to step back and we need to like really start taking this part seriously. Like, yeah, we can test things out, but we have to formalize this a little bit more. One of the follow-ups that I'd love to ask coming out of that, you had mentioned the idea of expanding into city number 2, expanding beyond just being in Berlin. What did that expansion process look like? My assumption is going from 1,000 people that are attending the event in one city was in many ways probably very different than when you started to expand into that new city. So what did that process look like? Were you able to take some of the people from city number 1, get them to go to the second event?
As participants, yeah, for sure. From an organizational perspective, back then, what we did is we looked for event managers in those cities. And basically, we weren't big enough yet to really hire a team. So we looked for people who would kind of do it and then get a share of whatever amount of tickets we sold. And so that's how we first found our local event managers in Munich and in Wuppertal in the west of Germany. And yeah, definitely people from Berlin, like our community, because right from the start, we started growing this community, of course, of people who would come every year to the Berlin event. Well, I mean, it grew massively. So you can see they brought a few friends as well. Yeah, we definitely had people follow us to those new locations as well.
Talk to me a little about when you expanded, let's say, outside of Germany for the first time. So I think about now you guys have events in like Austria, you have events in Copenhagen. What did some of those expansions look like to those other cities? How were you able to get those first, call it 100 attendees to sign up in those entirely new cities or countries?
Well, in Austria, it's pretty seamless because it's the same language. So it's German speaking. It's European Union, so everything between different members of the European Union is very easy. You don't have to like start a separate company in Austria. Same for Denmark. So generally, European Union is a great thing when it comes to that. You can easily make business in other EU countries, start a project in other EU countries. So for Austria, it's basically integrated into the German structure. It's basically the same. It's on the main website. For Denmark, it's a bit of a stepchild, I would say. We started, like, you could ask the question, why Denmark? It's a small country. It's not German speaking. It's not this easy transition that we had when we moved to Austria. So Denmark, because my co-founder, he married a actually Mexican-Danish woman. At some point, they moved to Copenhagen. And that's why it just made sense to also do it in Copenhagen. Then we soon learned that the Danes are absolutely enthusiastic, euphoric about this kind of experience event. I think we had the highest finisher ratios we've ever had at 100K in Copenhagen. Those guys are fanatics. They're badass. And so, yeah, in terms of market entry there, we had to, of course, have our separate language website. We had to have Danish campaigns, Danish social media, Danish. Then at some point when we did start doing actual marketing, Danish ad campaigns on Meta, on Google channels. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a process. It's not easy there's so many things you have to do. Like, for example, all our equipment, all our tents, our like the arches, the inflatable arches we have at the start and finish, all the merchandise, all that is in German. And so you need to have all these little boxes checked, like all this we need in Danish now. And in terms of logistics, it's also fairly straightforward because it's also reasonably close from Germany. Actually, at the Danish event, we had our vice chancellor participate this year. So probably the most well-known person so far to do a Mammutmarsch that we know of. So he's the Minister of Economics and the Vice Chancellor of Germany, who participated and wanted to maintain a low profile, but of course, tough even in Denmark with all the Germans traveling there. But yeah, those are a few things you need to do. But the core thing, I think, once again, is to transfer that same kind of general storyline and philosophy and brand to the new country. If you do that, everything's basically already in place, and then you just have to do a lot of work in terms of, now we need this and that new language, and we need to order those things. Yeah, so it's a bit of a process. This year, for example, the goal is to go to Spain as well. So we're going to have an event in Madrid later this year. And yeah, that's a bit of a different step. And once again, my co-founder now is spending time in Spain. So with his family, they temporarily, who knows, maybe permanently, they headed to Spain. And so we thought, maybe that's a good opportunity to test doing an event there. It might be a bit different because it's further away. So we need like our own logistic down there. Then again, it's probably we have to take the different sorts of steps for that expansion as well.
Certainly you have, like, in many regards, the checklist from the German model that you can apply to some of these other countries as well. One of the things you had mentioned about Denmark in particular, I think I heard you say that there were quite a few Germans that attended as well. So it sounds like you've been able to take at least a portion of that German community and get them to attend some of the events that are happening outside of Germany, outside of Austria as well.
Yeah, definitely. So really traveling to Denmark is super easy from Germany. It's very close. We have a common border, or you can take a ferry. If you just head up to the Baltic Sea, there are quite a few connections. And so it's quite easy to get to Denmark. It might be easier for someone who lives in Berlin. Not sure exactly how long it takes from Berlin to Copenhagen right now. It might be easier than going to like one of the events in southern Germany. For that reason, I don't think we will have as many people travel to Spain for a Mammutmarsch event, but I might be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Who knows? We'll see.
And what a great point. I forgot about the maybe the €50 Ryanair flights that you can get if you're creative and to have a little bit of flexibility or book ahead of time. So I can imagine there are quite a few Germans that are able to get some really good flight deals as well. So one thing I'd love to ask you about is, let's say, start from square one in terms of building a new community. Let's say entirely different business, something other than Mammutmarsch, or for listeners maybe that are looking to build their own community. What guidance would you offer maybe for getting those first 100, call it like those first 100 really engaged fans to be part of a new community?
Well, first of all, I think I would give you the same answer I gave at the beginning. Create something that people are really craving. If you do that, it's almost like a no-brainer. You tell them, hey, by the way, here I have this beautiful, gorgeous, best cake ever made for you. Do you want a bite? And in this metaphor, so create something that people are really, really craving, that people really, really want. Never approach entrepreneurship from the perspective of doing business or making money. Approach entrepreneurship from the perspective of creating something amazing, creating something that people really crave, people really desire, and that gives them something they haven't experienced before. So that's the first piece of advice. And with that, this basically entails do something you like and you're good at, because why waste your time doing something else you don't truly believe in? It's just not necessary. It can be so easy to look for business opportunities, but why not look for things that truly attract you as well, that you feel truly passionate about, that you really want to carry into the world? Because eventually, in my personal philosophy as an entrepreneur, I think that's the path of the entrepreneur. The path of the entrepreneur is, yeah, of course, at some point when you begin, you have to solve your financial freedom. You have to make sure you become economically independent. But once you do that, for me, entrepreneurship is really the journey, and this may sound overly spiritual, philosophical, to your deepest truth. And you do one thing, maybe you start out with your first project is for learning, to make sure you make some money, to make sure you learn your craft. But once you do that, now I wouldn't even say once you do that, now I would say start out right away with something you love and something you truly understand. But let's say once you solved the financial part, make sure you get back to the drawing board and really think about, okay, what do I want to create? What do I want to contribute? What do I want to see in this world? Because that's what it is for me. Being an entrepreneur is really creating what we want to see in this world. And that can be everything. That can be building a chair, because that chair doesn't exist in the way I want it. It's in a way an act of creation. So being an entrepreneur means creating the things that you think the world needs or that you need and that don't exist yet. And so, yeah, I think that's the journey. Find something, and there we enter the realm of selling. Because when you find something that people really crave, and I mentioned that before, I like to do surveys. The easiest form of a survey is, hey, mom, what do you think? I did that a lot. Like when in the initial days, I designed something on my laptop, showed it to my mom. What do you think? Do you understand what this is? Ask a bunch of friends. The easiest way to get feedback, to do a market test, is that kind of thing. Just ask a bunch of people and then learn from it. And on a more advanced level, like now when we design something, we may ask our community, we may ask some 200, 500 people, hey, could you just tell us what you're missing potentially in the Mammutmarsch community, in the Mammutmarsch experience? But yeah, this is, I think, how it ties together the idea of doing something you truly want to create, and that generally entails something you're good at, something you're passionate about. And the third one, those are the three checkboxes for me. What are you really good at? What are you really passionate about? And what do other people also want? A big one, the third one, a very big one. But those three things, do those, and that's all you need to do. Everything you do afterwards is then just managing the process. It sounds oversimplified, and it probably is, but in a way, if you build that ridiculously solid foundation, everything you need to do afterwards is just make sure that the next pieces are built where they're supposed to be built. And that's basically the process from to I think financial independence, because some people who may listen to this who are not entrepreneurs may think, yeah, okay, cool, that I do this thing that I'm passionate about, that I love, but we all know you can't make money with that. It's not true. If you do the third one I mentioned, you really make it about something that people desire, that people need. And of course, there's a reasonably sized market. So there are a few details to all those components, of course. But if you approach it that way, it's an approach that some very well-known businesses did. Look at Google. They've always followed that strategy. Building a great product first, worry about making money later. It's a very successful approach of some really successful brands and businesses. So yeah, that's how I'd summarize the entrepreneurial journey.
Bastian, I love it. Well, hey, it has been a pleasure having you on today. Let me ask you, how can people either A, join the Mammutmarsch community, or B, learn about the newest event that's going to happen in an area close to them?
Right now, we're still very focused on the German market. So there's mammutmarsch.de, the main website at this point, with our Instagram, same name, Mammutmarsch. I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes for all those who don't know how the heck to spell that. And yeah, our website, our newsletter, our Instagram would be the best ways to stay in touch and always be up to date and know what we're doing.
Bastian, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on today.
Awesome. Great talking to you, Pat.
Thanks for tuning in to Customer Growth Sessions. If you found it helpful, subscribe and give us a review. It helps us to grow the show. Looking for more SEO guidance on how to grow your business? Contact us at intergrowth.com/estimator or email me directly. You can reach me at pat@intergrowth.com. That's all for today. We'll see you again soon.